Was there a bomb out there? Explosion outside the house. I don't know if something's crashed into the house.
There was a massive explosion near my house.
We got a plume of smoke and some light in the sky over in that area down the port. Ran the fire alarm.
At 2:46 a.m. on November 22, 2006, the day before Thanksgiving, a massive explosion occurred at an ink and paint products manufacturing facility in Danvers, Massachusetts, north of Boston.
We were rocked out of bed by a tremendous explosion.
We saw an orange glow that just started to take over the dark sky.
I didn't know if we were being bombed, if we were at war, if there were going to be more explosions.
The blast ripped through the adjacent Danversport neighborhood, waking sleeping residents who feared for their lives as windows blew in and ceilings collapsed.
Some of these houses are in real danger of collapse, making a search fairly difficult in some of them.
Danvers firefighters and police launched a comprehensive search and rescue operation as officials ordered an evacuation of about 300 residents and 10 businesses. Doors were buckled on vehicles as far as 300 feet away, and dozens of boats in the marina were damaged. In what some called a miracle, there were no fatalities, and only 10 residents were injured, suffering cuts and bruises. Still, 77 families were forced to relocate to temporary housing, and many were away for long periods of time while their houses were repaired. Residents counted 24 homes and 3 businesses damaged beyond repair.
The residents, of course, were devastated. They go from sound asleep to being completely homeless and essentially out on the road.
The blast wave that struck the Danversport neighborhood caused the worst community damage of any chemical accident the CSB has investigated to date. The explosion had a serious potential for life-threatening injuries and deaths.
Because of the serious threat to the public, the U.S. Chemical Safety Board investigated the explosion and traced its origin to an accidental release of flammable solvents at the CAI Ink Company. John Vorderbruggen led the CSB investigation.
Our investigation found that human error was likely a factor in this accident. But this error and its consequences could have been prevented by additional safeguards and process controls.
The following animation depicts the sequence of events that most likely led to the explosion and blast wave in Danversport. CAI, an ink manufacturer, and Arnell, which made paints, lacquers, and coatings, were located on an industrial site where flammable solvents had been stored and used for decades. Over the years, a quiet, mixed-use neighborhood called Danversport grew up next door to the site. In and around the CAI Arnell plant, both companies stored significant quantities of flammable liquids, nitrocellulose resins, and pigments. CAI made the chemical base for inks in large unsealed tanks, adding dry materials to the solvents that were then mixed by a large agitator blade and heated with steam. To prevent the accumulation of dangerous flammable vapor during operating hours, the production areas were ventilated with fresh air, which entered from a ceiling duct and flowed out of the building through 4 exhaust fans near the floor. But at night, operators routinely turned off the ventilation system fans to reduce heat loss, and also in response to noise complaints from neighbors. About 1 p.m. on November 21, 2006, CAI employees began mixing a 2,000-gallon batch of ink base in tank number 3. The production supervisor told investigators that he opened the steam valve at about 3 p.m. to start heating the mixture, planning to return later to close the valve when the temperature reached between 90 and 120 degrees Fahrenheit. He then left the area to help load and unload raw materials and products. The production supervisor recalled that he returned to the platform around 5 p.m. and noted the temperature in the tank was about 90 degrees. The supervisor later told investigators he believed he then closed the steam valve and left the facility around 5:30. Shortly before 6 p.m., The last remaining CAI employee turned off the fresh air supply and all the exhaust fans and left. But the CSB concluded the steam heating remained on. Most likely the production supervisor had forgotten to close the steam valve before leaving for the night. In the now unattended building, 10,000 pounds of flammable liquid continued to be heated and mixed in tank number 3 for the next 8 hours and 45 minutes. As CSB testing and calculations would later confirm, prolonged heating caused the mixture of heptane and propyl alcohol to boil, releasing hundreds of pounds of flammable vapor through the unsealed tank cover into the unventilated building. The building heating fans helped distribute the vapor throughout the production area. At 2:46 a.m., the vapor reached an undetermined ignition source, possibly an automatic heater switch or other electrical device, and exploded. The explosion created a blast wave that swept across Danvers port. One of the first homes the blast wave struck belonged to David Marcoux at number 3 Bates Street, adjacent to the plant site. He was sound asleep when the blast blew in his bedroom balcony sliding glass doors, sending shards of glass flying across the room, some of it hitting him on the back of the head.
I just remember being on my feet, looking around and just being like, wow, it's really windy in this room. And then all I could see was fire in front of me. And, you know, it was so hot and intense that I could feel it right on my face. You know, I was feeling the heat.
Mr. Marcoux and a friend who was renting a room escaped. His home had to be demolished and rebuilt.
And this appears to be the chemical building. We still have explosions rocking the area.
Down at the end of Bates Street, Susan Tropiano and her husband John Lovett feared for the worst after the blast hit their home.
My first thought that it had to have been a huge jet that had landed in the boatyard or something. And then we ran downstairs to get our son to make sure he was alive.
The family made it out of the house and joined the evacuation.
I need police officers to start evacuating this area.
The streets were in chaos. There was no street lights, no lights on in anybody's houses. And there were people running down the street in their underwear and their pajamas.
We probably have 4 or 5 houses that have had the back part of their building blown off.
Home after home was struck. Ceilings collapsed on sleeping occupants. Appliances and cabinets were thrown about.
We're going to need some help down here. We got some elderly that can't get up the street.
The blast wave struck 46 Riverside Street, where Ed and Diane Sanborn reside.
When I got thrown out of bed myself, I thought initially it might have been an explosion inside the house, a gas explosion. That's what it felt like. That's what it sounded like. It was deafening.
The Sanborns quickly gathered their children and fled their home.
So I just ran and banged on my older kids' doors and told them to get out of the house, and went after my little one who had some stuff on him.
Mark and Janet Lettish live at number 12 Riverside.
I remember saying, oh my God, what the hell is going on?
The force of the explosion blasted the window and frame into the bedroom. Glass shattered and the ceiling collapsed.
It was like a science fiction movie. The bedroom windows came flying in and landed on us, but we were underneath the comforter, and then we pushed them off of us, and there was this incredible crashing sound, and that was the ceiling behind us.
The Lettish's house had to be torn down, but not before the couple walked with a video camera through their home of 25 years, recording the damage and strewn debris, including the kitchen clock, stopped at 2:46 a.m.
We needed to identify what led to such a powerful explosion. We photographed and cataloged the damage to 260 different buildings and vehicles and commissioned lab tests of the exact chemical mixture used at CAI. Based on the results, we estimated the explosive force from the vapor cloud that formed inside the closed, unventilated building.
CSB blast analysis determined that the most likely fuel for such a powerful explosion was the heptane and propyl alcohol in mixing tank 3. And while the production manager stated he believed he had closed the steam valve the night before the accident, CSB investigators concluded that the valve had actually remained open. It was a foreseeable error, made more likely by the lack of written procedures, checklists, alarms, and safety shutdown systems at the CAI plant.
At the root of this accident was CAI's failure to thoroughly review and analyze the potential hazards of its ink-making process. Such an analysis would likely have identified specific process controls that could have prevented the explosion.
CAI's operation was covered under the OSHA Process Safety Management Standard, which requires businesses to conduct a hazard analysis to identify and correct process safety deficiencies. But CAI said it was unaware the standard existed and never conducted a hazard analysis. Such an analysis could have identified the need for continuous ventilation, as well as for automated process controls and other safeguards to prevent human error.
In addition to federal regulations, state and local fire codes are important for controlling hazards at facilities that handle flammable materials. We concluded that Massachusetts should improve its state laws, fire codes, and licensing requirements in order to better protect communities like Danvers from chemical fires and explosions.
The CSB determined that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts had not adopted the most current national fire codes for safe handling of flammable liquids. The state does require local fire departments to inspect facilities with flammable liquids, but the laws do not say how often they must be inspected or what inspectors should look for. The last inspection of the CAI Arnell facility, conducted in 2002, focused on a fire suppression system and did not identify code violations related to flammable storage and handling. CAI and Arnell had stored 20,000 gallons of flammable liquids and 50,000 pounds of flammable solids at the site. Massachusetts law requires properties where flammable materials are stored and used to obtain licenses and permits and renew them annually. The original land use license for the CAI Arnell site dated from 1944 and allowed storage of 250 gallons of lacquer. At the time of the accident, town records referred to a license for 6,000 gallons of flammables, while the annual registration form listed 11,500 gallons. Over the years, no public hearings were conducted to review the safety of increasing the amount of flammable material close to homes and other businesses.
The CSB found that state law in Massachusetts does not give local governments clear guidance when businesses want to increase the amount of flammable materials they are licensed to store.
Following our investigation, we made numerous safety recommendations to CAI, the town of Danvers, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and the organizations responsible for developing fire codes that are used across the country.
Sometimes it feels like our lives are on hold until the last family moves back home.
At a CSB public meeting in Danvers to hear and approve the final investigation report and recommendations, the board heard testimony from a panel of state and local officials and a Danvers community leader. The panelists discussed the need for better fire safety regulations and enforcement at chemical facilities.
I'm also very pleased to say that CSB and the Department of Fire Services agree on pretty much everything. We agree on the cause of the fire and explosion. We agree to the need for further regulation in chemical process safety. And we agree on the importance of increased inspection and enforcement to protect the public and the regulated community.
The CSB called on the National Fire Protection Association and the International Code Council, which develop fire codes used around the country, to revise the codes to prohibit the heating of flammable liquids in indoor tanks that are unsealed and do not vent to the outside. And the CSB urged that the codes require automatic temperature controls to prevent overheating. The CSB called on the Massachusetts Office of Public Safety to adopt current national fire codes for flammable liquids and to require local fire departments to conduct regular inspections of facilities handling flammable materials using written inspection criteria. Firefighters should be trained to conduct the inspections, and licensing and permitting procedures should be clarified.
Once a chemical plant in Massachusetts received their initial permits and were inspected, companies were able to easily increase their capacities with little or no oversight or knowledge by the community.
The goal of having uniformed fire personnel inspect such facilities on an annual basis should be a central focus moving forward.
The CSB recommended that the Massachusetts legislature require that companies certify their compliance with fire codes and regulations. Increases to licenses for flammable materials should require a formal approval process that considers the views of nearby residents and businesses. In addition, the state fire marshal should audit local government's compliance with flammable licensing, permitting, and inspection requirements. Until the state codes are changed, the CSB recommended that the town of Danvers pass bylaws that tighten the licensing and inspection of facilities that handle flammable materials. And CAI was urged to develop a written safety program to manage hazardous operations.
Your report under consideration tonight provides solid suggestions how we can work to avoid another Danvers Port-type incident from happening. The recommendations are clear and achievable.
And I truly believe a cooperative effort among CSB and local and state agencies will benefit public safety for years and decades to come. If we all work together, we can take actions to prevent a recurrence of what happened in Danversport November 22nd, 2006.
The accident at CAI took Danvers officials and residents by surprise.
I was personally not aware of the potential of an event of this magnitude at that location, certainly.
We had no idea that this could happen to this company, and so just please be aware of what you have in your community.
But the message is be aware. Be aware of what you have in your community. Educate your staff, educate your community as to what is out there.
After the accident, the town worked to increase oversight of businesses that use flammable materials. Danvers revitalized its local emergency planning committee, or LEPC, which had not met for many years.
And the newly resurrected Danvers LEPC has expanded its largely emergency-based charter to include looking into what we can do to prevent a recurrence of this type of tragedy. It will take these local efforts, combined with state and federal efforts, to ensure public safety.
And if it can happen in Danvers, it can happen anywhere in the United States.
The CSB believes accidents like the one in Danvers can be prevented if companies review their potential hazards and use appropriate safeguards, and if effective fire codes are developed and enforced.
For more information on the CSB investigation of the Danvers explosion, please visit csb.gov.